The Mafia's code of Omerta and the associated consequences for breaking it were deeply entrenched in the culture of organized crime. The harsh treatment of snitches was seen as necessary to maintain order, discipline, and secrecy within the organization. There would be figures who take the risk of breaking Omerta, usually to save their own backs. How cognizant were these mob figures their lives were likely over the moment they crossed that line? When the Mafia managed to get their hands on members who had snitched or cooperated with law enforcement, the outcomes were typically grim. Many faced intimidation and threats, many ended up in exile, but most ended up dead. From the turn of the 20th century, organized crime would prove a long-standing thorn in the side of the American justice system, and those who blew the whistle would pay the highest price. Join us today as we examine some of the worst outcomes for those who snitched on the mob. Welcome to History on Fleek. Kid Twist could sing, but couldn't fly. A New York Jewish mobster born in 1906, Abe "Kid Twist" Relis grew a fearsome reputation as one of Murder, Inc.'s most feared hitmen. Hired as a contracted enforcer for the National Crime Syndicate under the auspices of the infamous Meyer Lansky, a particularly brutal individual whose chosen murder weapon was an ice pick, no less. Relis was a little man with a soul-destroying chip on his shoulder. He would become so adept at taking lives with an ice pick, many of his victims were said to have died of a brain hemorrhage. However, Relis was not a careful killer. His violence was unbounded and wanton. He would murder parking attendants for not picking up his car in sufficient time. He would kill car wash workers who simply frustrated him. This wanton taker of lives was seemingly destined to have a run-in with the law, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. As his reputation and body count grew over the 1930s and 40s, Relis began to lose control of his standing, catching the attention of fellow feared mobsters, the Shapiro brothers. They would exchange murder attempts till Relis had killed Meyer and William Shapiro. Come 1940, Relis was implicated in countless murders and was facing the electric chair for a lifetime of heinous acts. To avoid the chair, Relis became a government informant. Giving a litany of damaging evidence to the government, Relis implicated most of his friends: Irving Nitzberg, Mandy Weiss, Harry Strauss, Frank Abondano, and Louis Capone. Relis even went as far as implicating his childhood friend Bugsy Goldstein and his boss, Lepke Buchalter. Every last one of these figures would end up dying in the electric chair. Yet when Abe Relis wanted to turn on Albert Anastasia, his luck would change, and the mob would come after the snitch. For the Mafia, turning on the oath and breaking Omerta meant ultimate betrayal. To serve as a warning for others, murder was often the ultimate outcome. Months into being an informant, Relis was guarded in his room by 5 police officers at the Half Moon Hotel. However, on that night, the police had been bribed to step aside. A scene was staged to look like an escape had been attempted and failed, with tied bedsheets tied together hanging from the hotel window. Yet there were no signs of an attempted escape otherwise. Abe "Kid Twist" Relis had been thrown to his death. Barboza, animal by name, animal by nature. Another notorious mob hitman with a quite hideous reputation was Joseph the Animal Barboza. Born in 1932, the son of Portuguese immigrants, Barboza would initially follow his father into a career of boxing, going by the name of the Baron. He would box across the 1950s as a light heavyweight, and this is where he made his first associations with organized crime. His sparring partner was Patriarca crime family associate Americo Sacramone. Known by some as the Wild Thing, Barboza would show his appetite for chaos, leading to the largest prison break in the Massachusetts Correctional Institution's history in 1953. It was during this decade he would cement his role as a vicious killer for organized crime. The Patriarca crime family would never induct Barboza, as he was of Portuguese heritage and not Italian, though this didn't stop him from a colossal streak of brutality. As gangland warfare escalated across Boston in the 60s, Barboza became a hitman to be feared. His reputation as the Animal had pointed to an alleged incident where he bit a man's ear off his head. Yet Barboza's chronic killing and sidewalk soldier work did not save him from a fractious relationship with the Patriarchas. Imprisoned once again in 1967, Barboza was serving time for murder where he made the choice of testifying against the family. It was discovered he had fabricated evidence and testimony against those he felt disrespected by. Barboza was released in October 1975 and moved to San Francisco under a different name. He shared an apartment with James Chalmers, a small-time hoodlum for South Boston, which was likely his undoing. Some 4 months later, in February 1976, Joseph Barboza was shot 4 times with a shotgun, walking to his car after leaving the apartment. It's alleged, hearing the news, Barboza's attorney would state, "With all due respect for my former client, I don't think society has suffered a great loss." Quite the review. Joe Cargo, the original turncoat. Mobster for the Genovese family, Joseph Valachi was born in 1904 in New York City. He would begin his criminal career in his youth in small street gangs, committing burglaries. In his 20s, he would spend his first stint in prison, serving 9 of 18 months in Sing Sing. Come 1930, Valachi was inducted into the Lucchese crime family as a made man. He began working his way up the ranks as a soldato and played a murderous part in the Castellamarese War across the years of 1930 to 1931. Yet his climbing up the ranks and commitment to the Cosa Nostra Code would be beset by significant engagement in heroin trafficking decades later. Come 1959, Joseph Valachi was convicted of trafficking narcotics and was facing a sentence of 15 years. Where Joe Cargo Valachi made his place in history was becoming the first member of the Italian-American Mafia to admit to its existence. The Valachi hearings would birth the term Cosa Nostra from his testimony translating to "our thing." They would take place in October of 1963 and were chaired by Arkansas Senator John L. McClellan, the very first of its kind. Valachi's testimony gave details on the operations and rituals of the organization never aired before, and the trial was brought to the American public on television. Among all the operational details, the testimony would also clarify the exact crime family members and several unsolved murders. The Valachi Papers, his memoirs, though initially blocked, would eventually become a bestseller and later a film. So what exactly cued Valachi to make a drastic decision never taken before and considered unimaginable by most? Intimidation and threats were consistently used to keep Mafia members in line, should they be suspected of turning to the authorities. It needn't be overt. It could be subtle, even kind. Valachi would be serving time for drug trafficking in 1962 with mob boss Vito Genovese before his testimony. He would report that during his stint, Genovese would kiss him on the cheeks. Valachi believed he'd been given a threat, a kiss of death. Riddled with paranoia and expecting an attempt on his life at any moment inside prison, Valachi would assault a fellow prisoner with a metal pipe, believing the prisoner was going to kill him. Once arrested for the attack, Valachi took the nuclear option and informed on the Mafia like never before for the first time in American history. This all-time break of Omerta would be a ruinous blow for the Mafia, who placed a $100,000 bounty on Valachi's head. For the next 7 years of his life, Joseph Valachi served time at the Federal Correction Institution, La Tuna in Anthony, Texas. The man who placed the bounty on his head, Vito Genovese, whose intimidation had cued Valachi's turn, would ironically pass away 2 years before Valachi. Joe Cargo would die from a heart attack in 1971. The contract for his life was never collected. Sant'Antonio, turn of fate in a public place. It was not uncommon for the Mafia to make a public display of a murdered snitch. Leaving the body of an informant in the street or a public place was a profound statement of power, not only to Mafia members, but to law enforcement itself. A prime example of this was the murder of Alfredo Sant'Antonio, initiated into the Gambino crime family in 1953. Sant'Antonio was brother-in-law to Jack Parisi, a Murder Incorporated hitman himself. Sant'Antonio became suspect to the Gambino crime family a decade later. In 1962, he would avoid a prison sentence for selling stolen bonds. This would be because he turned informant a year earlier. Declassified FBI reports detail Sant'Antonio as informant NY3864. Across 1962 and 1963, Sant'Antonio would deliver numerous reports and details to the FBI, and the clock was ticking. Fates would entwine in the worst of ways for Sant'Antonio. Joseph Valachi had turned, and his testimony to the U.S. Senate Committee was a matter of weeks away in 1963. Mafia bosses decided that murdering Sant'Antonio could undermine and discredit Valachi's testimony. So the call was made. Thanks to a listening device planted at a Mafia-controlled service station in Coney Island, Capo Regime Peter Ferreira revealed all the plan to murder Sant'Antonio. The recording would reveal Ferreira and others had long suspected Sant'Antonio was revealing the family's heroin trafficking to the authorities. Paul Castellano, a respected Capo Regime, ordered Ferreira to take out Sant'Antonio. The recording revealed Angelo Melli and Joseph Farinella were to be the shooters, with Ferreira and Russo as the getaway drivers. On July 11, 1963, the Flowers by Charm florist on 197th Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, would be entered by 2 made men. They would take out pistols and fire on the store owner 5 times before taking flight. The slain store owner was Alfredo Sant'Antonio, then 40 years old. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.